There are few things I enjoy quite as much as a nice, quiet breakfast. The kids aren't awake and they're not terrorizing the house yet. The neighbors haven't fired up those lawnmowers. And most importantly, pager duty is not blowing up my phone. The sweet sound of production not exploding. Welcome to Clean Code in the Browser, by the way. This is our third episode. Today we're going to be talking about the O in the solid principles, the open-close principle. So last time we had taken a look at the single responsibility principle and looked at how we could structure our code so that any given module or class would only change for one reason. We took a look at who the change agents were in order to inform that modularization. We talked about command query separation and how that could remove the element of surprise from our code. We were able to say that functions either should only have side effects or should have no side effects, and that helped to keep our code transparent and composable. Finally, we talked about functional composition and how we were able to apply the ideals of Taco Bell programming to our JavaScript. Admittedly, it did not taste very good, but we were able to create some confidence in higher order functions that were built using lower level solid building blocks. What do you think? Did I cover everything? Yeah, that sounds about right. Now, when we're going through the solid principles, we really need to ask ourselves what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. I mean, is this just an academic pursuit? Are we trying to just add a few more tricks to the bag? Or is there something deeper? I've heard people say that the real process that you use to write code is the one that you use to fix hot production bugs. Now, when we're in those situations, we fall back to our most trusted tools. Well, production hot fixes are my most trusted tool. Oh, I know. Now, if we're constantly saying goodbye to our leading principles anytime that the going gets tough, it does raise the question, are we really even getting any value out of them during the peaceful times? Now, our leading practices are supposed to help our teams stay out of bad situations. But when we're in trouble, they hopefully will help us find safer solutions. In a production outage, it's easy to want to just do anything that you can that will maybe fix the problem. And it's easy to lose your head. Come on! Oh, please work! Ooh, yikes. Now we know when we're in that situation that the one thing we do not want to do is push a fix up to production that actually breaks even more stuff. And yet, when we're in that situation, it's easy to let our discipline fall to the wayside in the heat of the moment. Now, don't get me wrong. We're definitely going to deal with things a little differently when we're working with a production bug as opposed to day-to-day stories. I mean, actual urgency is going to call for a workflow that is optimized for speed. You probably won't stop a critical bug fix from going out if, say, it doesn't meet SRP. But some of those fundamentals are still very important. For example, you still need tests in order to demonstrate that you fully understood the problem and that you can verify the solution. You're still going to want another pair of eyes on the code, and you always need to push it to a pre-production environment so you can look for any unforeseen complications that might pop up. Now, once the fix is in production and it's verified, this is the perfect time to immediately go back in and clean up that tech debt.
Oh yeah, definitely gonna get to that code debt right away. Yep, not going to let it rot for the next 2 years. No, sir. Nope.
Well, the important thing is that on our teams, in every situation, whether they're urgent or not, we're creating shared understanding about the behaviors of the members. The real problem is when we end up with one person going off script and making calls that are against the shared agreements that we had without consulting anybody.
Going off script. You just took 12 takes to get that last line right. All you ever do is go off script.
Well, anyway, I think what we need now is a musical metaphor. Hundreds of years ago, Western music was established in places like this, ancient cathedrals and churches, by composers with groups of vocalists. Needless to say, we didn't have all of the microphones and the speakers that we do now, and so just to fill up these giant rooms with sound required a lot of vocalists.
I don't know the words, guys. Are they online? Kumbaya, my lord. Kumbaya.
Over the years, these monophonic songs started to shift. It was no longer just one musical line. We now moved into polyphony, where there are multiple moving lines in the song. The first polyphonic songs were probably a drone note with a moving line on top of it.
Wait, a drone? Huh, that must have been some cool music.
No, not that kind of a drone. In music, a drone is a low sustaining note that acts as a tonal foundation. Now, the moving line on top of it will create interesting intervals that create both harmonies and dissonances.
This is so boring. I want a new note. Medieval music sucks.
It didn't take long for this music to start getting more complicated as time went on. You now had multiple vocal lines that are all interweaving and mixing together, each unique, and yet they fit together to create a rich musical tapestry. So as the complexity of these songs increased, new structures like fugues and canons were created to define new rules for how these musical lines could come together. It was almost like a mathematical puzzle for composers to solve. All of these advanced harmonic rules would eventually evolve into something called counterpoint. And counterpoint really defined when we switched from the medieval period over to the Baroque period. At that point, most of the instruments were still very rudimentary and rough, and so composers were still doing most of their compositions for choirs. The Baroque period introduced a new idea to vocal music, the soloist. New song forms like the cantata offered opportunities for a solo vocalist to sing their part over top of the rest of the choir. Now this highlighted a new idea, having a single person's contribution over top of the group. Now fast forward several hundred years to today. Choir music and the music of individual vocalists both still very popular. But professional vocalists have optimized their voices very heavily towards one side or the other. Soloist voices are designed to stand out. Now when you turn on the pop radio station, you're hearing folks who are focused on being edgy. Those edgy sounds are cutting through the music. Now, other factors like rhythm and diction and intonation, those could all be fudged a little bit if it helps the vocalist give a more dynamic and exciting performance. Now, it's no surprise that soloists can have a difficult time being part of a choir. After all of the optimizations are kind of flipped. You're trying to blend in, you're trying to fit in, you're trying to match pitches and intonation and rhythms with the entire group. You're trying to contribute to the sound without being individually heard. Now, a choir doesn't just sound like a bunch of vocalists thrown together. This blending creates a new sound. It's unique and it's distinct. The whole truly does become more than the sum of its parts. Now, I will admit that the idea of trying to blend in never made a lot of sense to me. I wasn't a soloist, but I was a percussionist. And as a percussionist, I was very accustomed to having everyone be able to hear every single stroke of my sticks. Percussion instruments are meant to stand out. That's kind of the whole point. And it was nice to always be able to hear my personal contribution in the music. Now, when I first started coding, I found that I wrote my code a lot like how I played the drums. It was loud and flashy and impressive. I knew that there was a team that I was contributing to, but my focus was really on my individual contributions. I mean, after all, isn't that how you get the big raises? Later, I would realize that there's a name for people who act this way. Lone wolves. Now, a lone wolf is more interested in the glory of the solo than the subtle blend of the choir. Now, on one hand, it's easy to think of a lone wolf as a top performer because they are very good at picking off some of the most important tasks and making sure that everybody knows when they're done. They put their heads down and they get results. On the other hand, lone wolves tend to miss a lot of things. Things that perhaps are not important when you're coding at 2 a.m. in a dorm room, but things that are valued quite heavily by software organizations. For example, lone wolves tend to get feedback on their code very late, or maybe not even at all. I mean, if your code works, what's the point in collaboration? Well, that collaboration is what we use to make sure that we're getting the best ideas on the table. Inevitably, those lone wolves are going to make a mistake, and when they do, that mistake is going to be very expensive and difficult to solve. Lone wolves leap at the chance to do a greenfield build, but the moment that there's maintenance work to be done, they seem to disappear. In many organizations, the maintenance side of things is not celebrated, and so lone wolves want nothing to do with it. They want those exciting new projects. Now, most of an organization's success comes from existing software, but the lone wolves want nothing to do with that old code. Lone wolves tend to avoid accountability while they are avoiding collaboration. Without accountability, you get to create the illusion of fantastic productivity by avoiding those pesky things like tests and leading practices and quality standards. So here's a Wolf Pro tip. If you want to be a 10x developer, all you have to do is write enough crufty code to keep 10 other people busy fixing it. Cut! No, cut! No. What is with all of the wolves? Where are you, Steve Irwin? This is like a wolf video series? What is this? No, they're different wolves. One's a musical wolf, one's a metaphor. You just shoot the film, for goodness sake. Okay, and action. Healthy teams do not work like this. They can't work like this. I mean, if this were a rock band instead of a software development team, these behaviors would be the Yoko Ono. Without resolution, it is all solo projects and breakups from this point on. In a talk about team collaboration, Woody Zuhl said that it's not about getting the most done. It's about getting the best of everyone into everything that we do. Now, many organizations are realizing what Woody already knew, that coding throughput is not our biggest problem. Now, our biggest problems are quality, maintainability, fostering an acceleration of product development rather than getting slowed down by code debt. It's about making sure that we're solving the right problems, using the best solutions, and challenging our assumptions along the way. It's easy to oversimplify the benefits of team collaboration when you're only focused on bus count. By bus count, I mean the number of people that can get hit by a bus and still have enough people on the project to complete it successfully. Yes, bus count is important, but it's not nearly as important as getting all the best ideas on the table, or challenging our assumptions, or making sure that our system is maintainable by everyone on the team. Now, principles like solid are valuable for projects that even have just one developer on them, but that value multiplies when you add more people to the team. By creating some shared understanding around what practices we use as a team, we are able to dramatically reduce the number of surprises and improve the maintainability. Now, as we're talking about open-close principle, or single responsibility principle, or really any of the other principles that are coming, remember that it's not enough for just you to be thinking about this stuff. Talk it over with your team. Try to demonstrate the value and build consensus around these leading practices. Once you have that shared understanding with your team, you now have expectations that you can use in order to hold lone wolves accountable. Without those shared expectations, it can be very difficult to confront a top performer about poor practices. Now, you'll want to do this sooner rather than later because prevention is key. It's much easier to prevent lone wolf behaviors from starting than it is to retrain people's brains about how they think about writing software. So avoid the soloists. Focus on blend, focus on unity, focus on harmony. Let your team sing. Hello?
Yeah, hi.
This is your manager. Listen, just wanted to talk to you about that paint report software that you worked on last episode. Great stuff, great stuff. We use it all the time. Love the reports, great reports. About the reports, listen, I'm hoping you can help me with a feature request.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, I can make one little change for you.
Ah, great.
Great. Hey, Marty, I told you this guy would do it. Listen, so just a piece of cake. I just need you to reorder the columns in the output, okay? Oh, so you just want the order of the columns swapped? Yeah, no, it's no problem. Yeah, I'll have it done before you know it. No, thank you, sir. Ha! What luck! This is such an easy change, it's only going to take me 5 minutes.
So in the last episode, we built out the paint and paint report classes that we were using to generate some HTML tables that displayed the colors of paint that we had and how much was remaining. So it looks like getReportHeader and getReportRow are the things that we're going to be changing in order to swap the color and the remaining. Now we do have some tests that are currently running and passing. One specifically for rendering a report. And we can see that we expect color to be first, remaining to be second. Let's double check to make sure that this is working. Sure enough, it's passing. So now let's change this to be what we want moving forward, which is to have remaining followed by color. And then this is going to be blue, red, green. That was 5, 6, and 7. So we're going to expect this now to be failing. Definitely failing. It looks like it's failing for the reason that we expected. So let's make that change to getReportHeader. I'm going to change this to remaining. And let's change this. And now I think we should be passing. Sure enough, looks like we have got the job for the boss done.
All right, so git commit, git push, and I am done. Hey, who's pinging me this late in the day?
Hey, did you change the paint project? Don't answer that. Of course you did. I got your git blame right here. What are you doing, you knucklehead? You changed our tests, and now everything's broken.
I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I just reordered the columns. It's no big deal.
Oh, yeah, sure. No big deal. No big deal. Don't worry about the import script that I've got that parses the HTML tables and pulls the data out for a data import. No. Because you changed the format, now all of my processes are kaput. Thanks a lot. Now get it fixed. Besides, I got a hot date tonight. Come on, hurry it up.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that would break anything. Sorry. I guess I'll make that a configurable setting then.
All right, so it looks like I need to make this configurable so that you can either use the original table order or so you can use the new reverse table order. So my tests aren't currently accurate because I need to change this back, but I'm going to need another test to test the case where I do in fact want the new reordered order, which makes tons of sense. Let's see here. So if we undo all of this, put this back to its original state, and then we're going to create a new expectation. So here, not just it returns an HTML table, but I guess it reverses the order of the columns. Now, we want this reverse order, but we need to figure out how to tell the software that that's what we want. So we're calling on the paint object, we're calling generate report. And right now it doesn't take anything. And it looks like what we want to be able to do is probably pass some option in or some kind of a flag to tell us that yes, we want to reverse the order of these columns. So what if we do reverse columns true? And that should give us the information that we need in order to make that change. So now, I assume we're going to have a couple of failures here. All right, so the paint rendering report fails because we are giving it the reverse order when we should be giving it the not reverse order. So we can back out of these changes here. All right, so now that first one it looks like is passing, and now the problem is that the order of the columns is not being reversed. So if we go over to the index file, so to the actual paint class, we can see that the generate report is instantiating a new paint report class, and it's passing in the data, which we get from this.store get all, and then it's calling the generate function. So it looks like we're going to be getting the options in here, and we'll want to be passing those options through so that we have access to those inside of Paint Report. So that would put our options here, and let's see here, reverse columns equals options.reverse columns. And we want this to be backward compatible. It should default to false, so we can just do one of these, and that will, if it's a null value, then that will just give us a false. So now we need to actually do something with it. So right now these are the correct orders. So if this dot reverse columns, and we'll just do quick and dirty here because I want to get out of the office as quickly as possible. So if it's reversing, we'll do the other order. And then we can do something similar down here. And we'll have to reverse these as well. All right, let's check our tests and see if that works or if we screwed things up. It passed. Fantastic. So now we have a configurable way of either reversing the columns or not reversing the columns. We should be good to go.
Okay, I think that should finally do it. Now, it's time to enjoy the weekend. Oh, no. Yeah, this is Chris.
Yeah.
Hi, it's your boss again. Listen, the changes that you made to the paint report, really great stuff, great stuff. Our stakeholders are going to love the new column order. Oh, well, great. I'm glad that you like it. I'm going to have to get going here, so...
Yeah, I
probably should have mentioned why we needed those columns changed. You see, we added some new price data for our paints into the data store, and I really need to get that price information into a new first column in the report. You think you could maybe do that for me? Wait a second, you're saying that you changed all the data sources to add prices? That's a huge change. I'm gonna have to update everything.
Oh,
Don't you worry, I wouldn't do that. I'm not stupid or something like that, no. We left half of the data stores the same, and only the other half are changed. So, hope that helps, and, oh, I do need this tonight, so...
thanks.
Tonight? Tonight? Wait, are you kidding me? Hello? Hello? You've got to be kidding me. All right, focus. We should be able to still knock this out before dinner.
All right, so first things first, we're going to need a new test case where we're going to deal with the possibility that we might have prices. Now, before we get there, though, I want to do a little bit of cleanup because we definitely have some duplication between these two tests, seeing as I just copy-pasted the entire thing. So, looks like this can all get moved up to a before each block. Let's see here. So our paint we will need up here. So before each, we're going to fire up that paint. We're going to use some paint, and that means that we don't have to worry about it in this test. We don't have to worry about it in this test. Double check to make sure we didn't mess anything up. Okay, so now I'm going to create a new expectation. So this time, we're going to say that it includes price information. Let's see here. So our expectation is that it's going to have remaining in color, but he said he wanted the first column to be price. So we're going to add price. And let's see here. We'll say that the first price is 100. And this one's going to be 200. And this one will make 300. So now we have to figure out how to actually pass the price information in. We could probably pass it in the same way that the reverse columns information is getting passed in. So let's see here. I think that our prices are probably going to be something along these lines where we've got blue, that's 100, and red is 200, and green is 300. And then we can just pass that in. So let's see what these tests are doing now. All right, so we expected them to have the price and the price information. Obviously, it doesn't, so that's failing for the right reason. Let's see what we can do about it. Coming back to the paint report, the first thing that we want to do is we want to get the prices out from the options. And if they weren't included, I think a null value is probably right, so we'll just leave it like that. coming down to get report header. So we only want to display this header if we have prices. And that's going to require a th and the word prices and a closing tag. So let's see here. So if this.prices, so what do we want here? We're going to need some kind of a value that we can put in. So how about prices header, and that will equal th prices. And we're going to need that to be defined up here. And so now I should be able to put this in here. So that will get snuck in if prices header is defined. And actually, because if it's undefined, it's going to show up as a string undefined. So I think we can go like that, and that should solve that problem. And then if we, let's see here. So for the other case where we're not reversing, I guess we want to put it at the end. Wasn't exactly clear, but we can give that a whirl. So let's try putting that in here. All right, let's run the tests. Shouldn't be passing yet, but we should be a little closer. So looks like, all right, so we got here, although I said price instead of prices, so we can fix that. And now we need to actually include the prices down here. And so get report row is pulling in color and remaining, but we're going to need more than color and remaining. So we need to actually get to the prices. So if this.prices, then our price value is going to equal, so it's this.prices and looking for the color. And so that would give us the value of it. And I guess we actually don't need just the value. We need it wrapped in a TD as well. So we should be able to do TD, one interpolation. I think that should do the trick. And again, we'll have this default to a blank string otherwise. So price value we can now insert here. And we can insert here. Let's take a look at the tests. All right, and it looks like that is passing. So now we are able to both reverse the columns, and if we have price data, we're able to feed that in as well. The boss is going to be happy.
All right, I think I'm finally done for the night. I should probably call the boss and let him know I'm done first, though. Hey, go for the boss.
Hi, it's me. I just wanted to call and let you know that
I wrapped it up. I was able to update all of the paint scripts to use the new price data. So, have
a good weekend.
Whoa! Amazing! That is the greatest thing I've ever heard. You are the best developer. Really. I mean,
Are you
okay? You sound loose. Did I just talk to you like an hour
ago?
Hey, man, you know what they say. It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yes, here.
It's past 5 o'clock here. Way past 5 o'clock. Now, listen, I'm going to need your help with one teensy little thing more tonight. I talked to the designers, and they told me all about the differences between table-based layouts and semantic layouts. Frankly, I'm disgusted that we are still using tables in our reports. It's disgusting. I want those tables changed to divs immediately. What? Converted to divs? But it's tabular data. Tables are the right thing
To use.
Look, I don't know what tabular means, okay? But the semantic web is the future. I want it now. So, divs instead of tables, but we can't break any of the existing scripts. Whew, this is going to be fun.
So once again, we're going to start out with a test. So this time we need a test showing that we are able to use divs as kind of an optional configuration. So we're going to change this to it uses divs. Since we copy and pasted this, it looks like this is something that can be cleaned up. So we can put this inside of our before each, since it's going to be used across a few different tests. And I can delete that from this test here. We should be in a good spot. So our expectation, it uses divs. So now this is going to become just a div, and maybe it has a class of like table, since that is really what we're doing here. Down at the bottom, this will just be a closing div. Now, for these TRs, these probably each need to be a div again. So we can swap these guys out. All of these guys change. Okay. And then let's see here, we've got the TH. So this maybe we want to change to a strong, just so that it is highlighted as the column headers. And there's a little bit of extra stuff on the end here that we don't want, the T head and the opening of the T body. We're going to delete all of that. Now we've just got these TDs here. Maybe these can just be spans. That's probably a good place to start. And we'll just do this a whole bunch of times. Swap all of these guys out. All right, so that should give us the markup that we want to have. Now, the expectation, we need some way to tell generate report that we want to use divs. So that might just be a good additional option that we can pass in. Use divs true. It's a little ugly, but maybe it's a place to start anyways. Let's run the tests and see if they're failing for the reason that we think they should be. All right, so we ended up with a table, but we expected to have a bunch of divs. So far, so good. Now over in Paint Report, we need to grab that option, and we'll do something similar to these others. We'll say use divs equals option use divs, and that way the default will just be false if nothing is provided. And now we have to take a look at where is all the HTML that needs to be swapped out from tables to divs. And the answer is it's everywhere. I mean, it is all over the place. All three of these functions have table and T-body and TRs and THs and all of these all over the place. Oh, what a mess. So we got to figure out how to somehow make all of this swappable. So we can start at the top. So I see that we've got table kind of wrapping everything. And so we have a thing that I guess it's wrapping the report. And that could be a function that's going to take some kind of content. And we know that we want to return, so it's going to be a, right now it's a table, and then we're going to put in the content and close that table up. That would be a place to start. So let's see if we can swap out, let's see here, so it'd be this dot wrap report. And then the content is just going to be all of this. And then this would close up here, actually with a parenthesis. Let's see if this works. Okay, so our div case is still failing, but the others pass. So that approach seems to work all right. And what we'll be able to do is that wrap report is now a new abstraction that will be able to say something along the lines of if this dot use divs, then return div class equals table. And we'll put in some content here. And then we'll close up that div. Otherwise, we're going to return that. And so now wrap report is going to be able to support both which seems like it would work all right. Let's see if that actually, well, it's not going to pass the test, but let's see if we see the difference in our test output. So sure enough, we did get a div here, a div of class table. Now we still have all this other stuff because they haven't changed that yet, but we can see that it did use that when we said to use the divs. So we can now use that approach to wrap all of these other things, the T body, the T head, the TRs, THs, the TDs. All of these things are basically just wrapping content with some kind of markup, and maybe we can follow this pattern in order to extract all these ideas, and then inside of those we can use some simple conditions to then give us either a div or something table-based, depending on what we want. So let's see how fast I can do this.
Bit by bit, line by line, we all start somewhere in this life. Note by note, ones and zeros, picking up the pieces, make things right. Oh, the challenge is great. Oh, trying to keep the faith. Remember, you've got the power to bring beauty back. Bring beauty back. Remember, you've got the power to bring beauty back. Bring beauty back. Oh, bring beauty back. Note by note, ones and zeros. Oh, bring beauty back. Note by note, ones and zeros.
Whew, okay, well, looks like I finally finished that. You can see that we now have 5 passing specs. Everything is working the way that it should. Let's take a look at what happened in the code here. And so now, where we used to have a bunch of hard-coded HTML, all of that has been pushed out of getReportHeader, out of getReportRow, into some of these wrap methods. So similar to wrapReport, which is going to wrap it either in a div or in a table. We have wrapBody, which will wrap it in a T-body, or in the case of a div, we didn't really need any kind of a body wrapper, so it's just going to return the content. WrapHeader is what's going to either wrap it in the T head or just a plain old div. WrapRow, going to wrap in TR or just a plain old div. WrapValue, this is where we're doing the TDs, or for our divs, we're using spans. And WrapColumn, for those column headers, we're using the THs or we're using strongs. Now, I'll admit that it seems a little weird the way that we're using all of these if statements. It doesn't seem ideal, but at the same time, it's pretty clear what's going on here. And the good news is that we managed to pull out all of the specifics about the particular kind of HTML that we're using, either a table or a div, and kind of tuck that away into its own method. So we might change it down the road, but I think for now, this works pretty well. I think it's time to call this done.
And I'm done. All right. Still have time. Submit the PR for code review, and I'm out of here. Oh, wow. Already have messages on my PR? Let's see. I hope we get workers' comp because my eyes are bleeding after reading this code. Oof. It slices, it dices, it does everything because you jammed every use case into one place. I used to be an atheist, but since I saw this God class, I found religion. That could be a good thing. Yo, dog, I hear you like conditional statements. Oh, no. This is really bad. I don't even know how things went so wrong. Do you have any ideas? Can you help me?
Wow, that is some rough feedback. Have you been following the solid principles?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that I'm following the single responsibility principle. All of this code has to do with the paint report, so I think it all belongs together.
Oh, okay. What about the O in solid, the open-closed principle?
Yeah, his code is open to sucking, and it's closed to being any good.
Okay, well, it sounds like we need to dig into what the open-closed principle really is. The open-closed principle is given its name because it states the code should be open to extension, but closed to modification. And that leads us to the next natural question, which is, well, what does that mean? Extension refers to adding new classes, modules, functions, or methods to the system. The existing implementation code doesn't change, we just add new ideas. If we took a look at the git diff, it would be totally green. Modifications, on the other hand, refers to making inline changes to existing logic. They might be new code branches or changes to the logic, but it's going to add new ideas as well as changing or destroying existing ones. Last episode, we talked about how SRP asked us to think about who might want to make changes to a particular part of code. Now with open-closed, we're thinking about what parts of the code are most likely to be changed, and then how can we make those more changeable? So here's a trivial example. It's a function that takes a user object and returns a greeting message. So if I pass in a user with full name John Doe, I would expect to get back, "Hello, Mr. Doe." Now, we can immediately see a problem with this code. It's only going to work for women because we've hard-coded in the Mr. string. Well, this is very easy to fix with a little bit of modification. All we need to do is add a new code branch so that depending on gender, we'll either get Mr. or Mrs. Now, when we're only talking about moving from one code path to two code paths, it seems pretty reasonable. But what about 3 or 4 or N? There are a lot of rules around name titles. Gender is non-binary. A woman might not be married. They might be a doctor or a reverend, or heaven forbid, they might have a military title or be an ambassador or be the Queen of England. Now at this point, this code is spiraling out of control. We are breaking open-close principle by modifying the function, but it's not immediately obvious how we can use extension and solve this problem by just adding new functions either. What we are missing is an abstraction. Now we can see in this trivial example that what we're missing is the ability for the user to have that responsibility of deciding what their title is. Now by moving all of this logic into some kind of a title function on the user object, we're able to greatly clarify this code because now it's focused on the one thing it actually cares about, which is the logic for composing a greeting message. Now what's interesting about this is that there are many different ways that that title function could be implemented. Now it's possible there's just one function that has a whole mess of logic inside of it, but perhaps there might be a different subclass for user for each different type. And inside of each subclass, they could define that function in a different way. In fact, maybe each of them just return a hard-coded string. So now at this point, we can create greeting messages for any user class, maybe any user subtyped class, or really any object that's duck-typed to respond to title. By resisting the urge to just jump into this code and make inline changes, we were able to identify the missing abstraction and move forward using extension. Now the open-close principle encourages us to use a lot of abstractions, indirection, and interfaces in our code. But, like all things, this comes at a cost. First, it's possible to end up with some abstractions that are not particularly meaningful, and these abstractions can oftentimes cause more problems than they give us solutions. Also, for open-close principle to work, you have to know ahead of time what things are going to change. And frankly, that's pretty hard to do. Now, of course, we can guess, but when we're wrong, we're going to be investing a lot of time and energy into adding flexibility to a part of the system that legitimately may never change. Open-close is not a silver bullet. It requires discernment and some clear thought, and especially communication within a team to decide how you're going to use it. But when open-close is used well, it succeeds by preventing improper cohesion, reducing the rate of churn in code, and ultimately creating a more sustainable and maintainable system. So you should definitely give it a try.
Okay, so I think this makes sense. So anytime that I'm feeling the need to go in and modify existing logic in a class or module, I should probably stop and step back and ask, is there some missing abstraction that would allow me to instead make this change through extension?
Well, right, exactly. Now, if there's incorrect implementation code in your code base, then obviously you're going to want to just modify that and get it out there. We don't want incorrect code to remain. But assuming that the changes that you're making are just coming from the natural progression of the code base, then extensions will always be cleaner than modifications.
Well, in cases like this, where I'm going back over existing code to refactor it, I'm keeping an eye out for those logic junk drawers, where rules have just accumulated one by one over the whole life of the project.
Well, right again. Now, you'll have to use your judgment to decide which missing abstractions you want to actually fill in and what parts of the code maybe are best left alone for now. But when you find something that doesn't fit, pull it out, find the right place for it, and clarify the code base for your teammates.
Well, okay, time to start refactoring.
So back in Paint Report, we want to go through and keep our eyes open for logic junk drawers. And it doesn't take too long for us to find it. It's all this stuff down here. So we clearly have a lot going on inside of all of these wrap methods. And it has conditional logic in order to switch between the table-based layout and the div-based layout. So we imagine what would happen if we needed a third format. Maybe we needed a CSV, or we needed some other kind of report formatting. Well, looks like we would need some additional kind of flag or something that would be passed in, some type of the report, and we'd end up with just more and more conditionals. And obviously this is going the wrong direction. This is adding a huge amount of complexity to Paint Report JS, and what it's doing is it's all modification rather than extension. Every time that we want to add some new method for formatting a report, we are going in and adding to this new monster class as it's growing, rather than being able to put this logic in its own classes and its own modules. Anytime that we feel like we might be breaking the open-closed principle, we want to look for the missing abstraction. And here we can tell that this class is really doing two things, which might be an SRP violation as well. But we can see that in like get report row and the get report header, we're essentially using some logic in order to figure out what are the columns and what order are those columns in and how should those columns be displayed. And then for all the rows, what order should the row data be in and how should that be formatted. And then we just have a lot of formatter methods, which none of these necessarily know about rows or contents per se, other than the actual function names. But it does know that I'm just going to take some content, I'm going to wrap it in a certain way. I'm going to format it in a certain way. So we have formatting logic and we have data logic. And this seems to be the missing abstraction here, is that if we are able to separate out the data from the formatting is the thing that we keep adding more to. It's the thing that's going to be a CSV and other formatting options. This is the part that would totally balloon out. And so if we're able to create a new abstraction for a formatter, and allow there to be multiple formatters, a table formatter, a div formatter, a CSV formatter, whatever kind of formatter, then this is going to give us the ability to build out many of these classes. When we need to create a new one, we're now creating a new class, and we'll just be able to pop it into Paint Report JS without any downstream changes. So the first thing that I want to do is create a new formatter class. And this is going to be a place for me to move some of this logic, so that it is no longer going to be part of Paint Report JS. We'll be able to set aside as a formatter, and then from there we'll be able to further change it and perhaps use it as some kind of a parent class, but we're not there yet. So let's see. So let's export class formatter. All right, so we've got the functionality from Paint Report JS now inside of the formatter. This is going to, let's see, right now we have this.use divs all over the place. Let's see here. So how are we going to build this out? So we're going to want to create a formatter here. We'll need to import formatter. You know what? Let's make this a named formatter. Or okay, it is a named formatter. So import formatter from formatter. So we'll import that. We're going to instantiate a new formatter. And then I guess we want to say whether or not we want to use divs here. So maybe we can just pass that in for now, see how that goes. And then anywhere, so it looks like, right, we moved out all of the instances of use divs. So now we have a formatter that we're creating and passing in whether or not we want to use divs. So if we do a constructor here, this is going to take use divs. Then we can do something similar here. All right, so now currently we have all of like the this wrap report and this wrap body. All of those are missing now, but they do belong on the formatter. And in the formatter, I think all of these things, aside from using this use divs of having that state, the rest of these methods are stateless. I mean, they're pretty much just returning these strings based on the content that's passed in. So we should be able to come in here and change this. Let's see, wrap body. Get report row. We still have. Where else? So here we've got wrap header, wrap column, wrap value, and wrap row. So let's take a look at our tests and see if we're passing or not. We might have missed a reference or two. Okay, it looks like we got them all. All of our tests are still passing. Things are still working the way that they did before. Cool. So, given that, and our formatter is now working, now we can take a look at this mess, right? So we have the formatter that right now could either use divs or fall to some kind of a default table style. And it would be cool if we could extract these out, because obviously we have this use divs pattern going throughout the entire thing. And this is really asking for some subclassing. We want certain kinds of formatter. We want to have a table formatter. We want to have a div formatter. So let's start with export class div formatter, and we can pull out all of those. Extends formatter. Let's see here. And so now we're going to pretty much need all of these functions to be copied down into div formatter. And now, of course, we can dramatically reduce the complexity of what's going on here. These are all going to become one-liners pretty quickly. And then for our formatter here, we can pretty much get rid of this whole use divs thing and make this just about the table. Okay, so we have that. And really this, I mean, the formatter, I guess this would be the default of having table, but I think I really want to call this like a table formatter. Have this still extends formatter. Although the question is, at this point, what is the formatter doing? I guess we don't exactly know what that is yet. We know that we don't need this constructor anymore because we're now no longer going to be passing in that information of whether it uses divs. So let's see if we can get this working in our tests and in our implementation. So our formatter now, this is not going to be a formatter. We want this to be something that's passed in. We want to be able to pass in one formatter or another. So we're looking for options.formatter. And if we don't have a formatter, then we're probably looking for a new table formatter. And that no longer requires any of this stuff. We're getting the table formatter here. Now, that means that if we run our tests, I think all of them should pass except for the div one. Let's see if that's the case. Sure enough. So the first, the four that were testing the table-based layout, they all passed because it was falling back to the table formatter, but it does look like we need to make a fix in order to ensure that our div-based formatter is also working correctly. So let's take a look at the test because that's what we're going to be changing here. So when we are using divs, sure enough, we have this use divs thing, which now we're no longer using. We want to have a formatter passed in, and this would be a new div, what do we call it, div formatter? A new div formatter would be passed in. In fact, we need to import that. So this would be import div formatter from src, and that's formatter. Usually these things should probably be in their own files, but just for the sake of brevity, I'm throwing everything into the one formatter file and pulling it out of there. So let's see if this now gives us what we need to pass the test. Great, we are back to green, so that is now working. So at this point now, we have successfully created a formatter for the table and a formatter for the div. And sure enough, it is much easier to understand what each of these are doing. However, there's still, I think, one problem. If we go to the paint report, we see that there's still a lot of rendering information going on here. Like, we had to have a lot of information about how the formatter works in order to make getReport header and getReport row work. A lot of, like, this is all formatting information, really, in terms of knowing how to call wrap report and wrap body and, you know, each of these rows and whatnot. So really what we'd love to do is we'd love to extract this out as well and say perhaps Paint Report JS, its job is to make sure that we know what the columns are, get them right. We know what the rows and the row data are, and that we get that right. But then everything else that's display oriented is going to get proxied over to the formatter. So I'd love to take at least a lot of what's going on in these three methods and move that over to the formatter as well. And so let's do it.
Bit by bit, line by line, we all start somewhere in this life. Note by note, ones and zeros, picking up the pieces to make things right. Oh, the challenge is great. Oh, trying to keep the faith. Remember, you've got the power to bring beauty back. Bring beauty back. Remember, you've got the power to bring beauty
So let's take a quick look at what we did there. So the formatter base class, which moments ago didn't have anything in it, now has three functions. It's got the format, which is the formatting logic that we pulled out of the generate function from paint report. And we've got the get report header and get report row. And so now all of these were very rendering formatting focused, and now these are baked into the base formatting class. They are shared across both the div formatter and the table formatter and any other formatter I think that we might have coming up. And otherwise, the table formatter and the div formatter are the same. And if we look back at paint report, now it's much slimmed down. Now pretty much all it's doing when we call generate is it's generating the columns that we need based on some of that pre-existing logic, generating the rows that we need, and then it's calling the formatter in order to format those. And so now by extracting this new abstraction out from Paint Report, we have a very clean interface of formatters that is now successfully giving us the open-closed principle.
Hey, so this code is much better. Very, very improved. Thanks. Nice job using the subtyping in order to put the logic for the different reports in different places. I like it, but my only concern is I'm not sure if the team's ready to really rely on inheritance and JavaScript yet. They just don't seem to think it's idiomatic.
Well, we could try duck typing, see if that works.
Sure. I think that sounds good. Why don't you give it a shot?
All right. Well, let's see what this would look like if we use duck typing instead of class inheritance.
Duck typing is a technique that was formed in dynamic typed languages like Python or Ruby. The idea was that we didn't necessarily need to base our functionality on strict types. In fact, the idea of types in a dynamically typed language is much more loose. And so the idea of duck typing came from the idea that if it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, then there's a pretty good chance that it is a duck, and we can treat it like a duck. So when it comes to programming, rather than having to do type checking to make sure that an object is of a certain type and is therefore able to do certain things, instead we can just check, does this object do certain things? Is it able to respond to this method? Does it have this parameter on it? If it does, cool. We don't actually care what class it is or what type it is. It can do what we need it to do, and that's really all that matters. In order to get away from the subclassing and move towards a more duck-typed approach, one thing that we can do is we can change the structure that we have from a formatter-based class and having the table and div formatter subclasses, and change them all just to be modules. Change them all just to be plain old objects. And the table and div formatter objects can be extended with whatever formatter has on it. One of the convenient things about the way that these classes were written is that while the classes use this a lot in order to reference functions within the object, we actually don't really have state that we're dealing with in these formatters. Really, the main method that we use is format. We pass in columns and rows, and everything after that is fairly functional. So we don't have to figure out how to unwind state in this example, which is pretty handy. So instead, what we can do is let's change formatter just to be a const, and we'll just have it equal. This will be an object literal now, so we need to throw in a few commas. And now formatter is just a plain old object. We can come down here and do something similar with table formatter. Now it's not going to be extending formatter anymore since that's the subclassing. We're going to have to fix some of this formatting here. A couple more commas. And now the way that we can extend table formatter with the functionality that formatter has that's shared between them and that we still need, we can use object assigns. Object assigns, object.assign. So what this is going to do is it's going to take one object and it's going to extend it with all of the functions and parameters that another object has. And so this is going to copy references of the format function and others that are on formatter onto table formatter. And so this is a little more like mix-ins in Ruby than it is subclassing. We can do something similar here with Div Formatter. And update these. And then similar kind of thing. Object assign. And we're going to take the div formatter and we're going to extend that with the formatter. Now we can run tests and we're going to see that the tests are broken because we've changed the way that these objects work. Well, I also have a syntax error, which does not help. So let's change that. Missed the equal sign here. I think I got it on the other one, yeah. So let's try running this again. What I'm expecting to have happen is that we were treating this as a class before and it was being instantiated. So sure enough, now we're seeing all of these errors saying that it's not a constructor. And sure enough, it's not. So let's go and change that. We know inside of paint report, we need to change it here. And now we just want to pass in a reference to the table formatter module since it's no longer a class. And then in here, here's div formatter, same deal. We can just change that. And looks like that's the only place that's being used. So let's go back, try running the tests again. All right, so we are back to a passing state. So the good news is that we were able to remove the subtyping, we used duck typing, and now we'd expect the team to feel more comfortable with this kind of coding in JavaScript. But the bad news is that I still don't feel right about this code. Earlier in the episode, we talked about how when we add abstractions in order to satisfy open-close principle, one of the risks that we run is adding abstractions that are not quite right. Maybe they leak, or maybe they're just not quite meaningful or correct. And when I'm looking at formatter and table formatter and div formatter, on one hand, they make a lot of sense. We want table formatter to format tables and divs to do the divs. And yet, when I look inside of them, the methods that we've assigned to these different formatters don't always make a lot of sense. Now, with table formatter, they make a ton of sense. And it's mostly because we started with tables. And for each of these, wrap report, wrap body, wrap header, wrap row, the contents make a lot of sense because these are fairly table-specific ideas. But when I go to div formatter, it doesn't quite hold up as well. Wrap body doesn't make any sense in a div context, and I'm just returning the content. I'm not doing anything with it. And with a table, the header and the row are two distinctly different ideas, but here we can see that I'm just doing the same thing for both, and yet I've got these two different functions that I need to implement in order for this formatter to work. And in fact, once I pull in some new formatter, like a CSV formatter, it'll probably be the same kind of deal. There's no sense of body in a CSV. Header and row, they're all just the same. They're just comma-separated values. And so once again, I'll have to use this abstraction it's leaky. It just doesn't make sense for things that aren't tables. While there are many methods across these formatters, there's really only one that actually matters, and that's format. This is where the magic happens. It takes the columns and the rows, and then it spits out the rendered content. All the rest of the stuff are just kind of helpers and ways of trying to make this work across a series of different formatters, but it feels like we're really overcomplicating things. All we really want to do is essentially take some kind of a template and render some data into it and then spit it out. And that template is something that would be unique to each of these formatters, but the data is something that is common to them. So what would it look like to actually define format directly inside of our table formatter and our div formatter, rather than doing all of this song and dance and trying to figure out how to make it work for everything at the same time? Let's give it a try. So if we add format, and it takes columns and it takes rows. Now, really what we just want to do is we want to have a string template, and we want to render in some data. We're kind of doing that ourselves through all of these wrappers, but there's libraries that help us with this sort of thing. So what would it look like to pull in Mustache? Mustache is a pretty handy and simple templating language that we can use. So we want to create the template first. And this gets easier now that we have some multi-line strings in JavaScript. And I want to pretty much just inline all of this logic that I have down here in wrap report and others. So we're going to start with the table and end with the table. Somewhere in the middle here, we're going to first have the header. We're going to have a row. And now inside of the row, we want to have a th for each item that's in columns. And so using Mustache, we'll be able to iterate over columns, and for each column we'll have a th, and inside of the th we'll just drop what the column is. It's going to be the column name. So we'll just put that right in there. We'll back out of columns here and wrap up the tr and the t-head. Next, we want to do something similar with our body. I'm going to open up the t-body, close that up as well. And then inside of there, we're going to be iterating over the rows. Now, the rows are coming through as the rows are an array of arrays. Each array is the content. And so we're going to have a tr. And inside of that, we want to iterate over the row, which is dot here, this thing that we're in. And for each of those, we're going to have a td. And again, we're going to just drop in the content. We're going to close this iterator off. Okay, so now for each row, we're creating a row. For each item inside of that row, we're creating a TD. We're dropping that inside. We close that up, and that's looking pretty good. So now we've got this template. Our tests are expecting this to just be one big line. That's it. So we can, let's see here, do a little bit of regex. We can say we're going to replace a new line followed by any number of spaces. We're going to want to strip that out, make it global, and strip it out for that. That should work. And then we can use the Mustache library in order to render. And we just pass in the template, and we pass in an object that has our columns and it has our rows. And let's see if this is working. It works. Fantastic. So now the table formatter has its own format method, all of this other stuff is completely unnecessary. We can just blow it all away. So we can delete all of this, and we get rid of that. And now this is what our table formatter is looking like. Double check to make sure that we're still passing. Still passing, great. So now suddenly this is a much easier bit of code to understand and to maintain than what we had before. We're still able to have specific formatters that are implementing the format method, but boy, this is easier to understand. So let's do something similar to this down in Div Formatter as well. And so now we know that this is going to be, we've got a div, and that div has a class of table. And then for our row, our row and our headers is just a div. For each of these, we're going to do, I think it was a strong tag. Got that taken care of. There is no body. So for each of the rows, we're going to do a div. For each of those, we're going to have a span. And then we're going to close it off by closing the div. All of this should still apply, and we should be able to blow all of this stuff away, and we can get rid of this, and we should be able to get rid of the entire formatter object because now we're not using any of this. Let's see if the tests are passing. Tests are still passing. Fantastic. And so this is so much easier. Now, before we call it quits, there's one more improvement that I see we can make here. Table formatter and div formatter are both objects that have only one function, format. And an object that has a single function inside of it really is just a function in disguise. Table formatter and div formatter are just functions that take columns and rows and they spit out the markup. So why don't we change this to actually make them be functions? Change that. Then we'll do something similar here. Now we're going to have to make an update here instead of paint report, because right now it expects our formatter to have a format function. Now we're just going to yank that out and call formatter directly. And we can check our tests, see if we are passing. And we are.
Whew. Well, this is it. This is really it. This is the last commit. This is the last git push. May God have mercy on your ref. Oh boy. More PR comments. Let's see how this goes. Oh, code is 10 of 10. Would recommend. Oh, how nice. Looks good to me. Very, very good. Kissing face emoji. Oh my. This PR is simply inspirational. I shall name my firstborn Paint Report in remembrance of this day. That's a nice name. The Magna Carta, the Constitution, and now paintreport.js. Might be a little excessive, but I'll take it. Well, it looks like that's going to wrap up another episode. We've covered a fair amount of ground today. We started off by talking about the value of maintaining our leading practices through thick and thin, even when there are emergencies.
Yes, apparently crying for your mommy in a dark room does not count as a leading practice. Good to know.
We discussed some of the similarities between choirs and teams and soloists and lone wolves, and talked about how lone wolf behaviors within an organization can be very dangerous. Thankfully, we're able to combat those behaviors with strong shared expectations on a team.
We also learned that medieval music sucks. I mean, it's awful. Just complete garbage.
We saw how easy it can be to write code that breaks open-close principle, and then we were able to use refactoring techniques to go back and add subclassing and duck typing in order to fill in the missing abstractions.
And finally, we learned the age-old lesson that you should never, ever push code to production at the end of the day on Friday. Just a terrible, terrible idea.
Well, thanks for sticking with us, and come back for episode number 4 as we continue to explore the solid principles. Oh no, I'm gonna have to take this. I'll see you next time on Clean Code in the Browser. Hello, this is Chris. Hi, yeah. Ooh, no, we are not going to be able to make the site's nav bar work like Minority Report. No, take your Oculus Rift back to the store. Okay.